Good evening, comrades. Welcome to this really important meeting tonight. We are looking at the situation in Palestine, Israel, and it is still unfolding. So some things are still a little bit unclear, the involvement of Hezbollah, for example. But one thing is for sure, and this is the really most important point to make, that Hamas's attack on Israel was certainly not unprovoked, which is what we're hearing across the mainstream media. Systematic and racist oppression of the Palestinians by the colonial state of Israel has become even worse in the last 15 years with the blockade, and more recently with the state-sponsored extension of illegal settlements and the pogroms on Palestinian land. These actions have created the horrific conditions which have led to what we should call an act of resistance, but it's also an act of desperation, really. The aim of the Israeli state is quite simple. We might disagree on the words we use here, but it's surely ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population. Some people call that an apartheid state, but unlike the apartheid state of South Africa, which exploited its population, the Israeli state simply wants to get rid of the Palestinians. It's not interested in exploiting its labor, etc. And as a major ally of US-led imperialism in the otherwise very unstable Middle East, Israel is financed to the tilt, we know that, supported politically, financially, militarily by most Western governments. And this is what the anti-Semitism smear campaign has been all about, that we've seen in the labor movement and which has been extended now into workplaces, universities, and town halls. It conflates anti-Zionism, criticism of Israel, with anti-Semitism. And we've seen the result. People participating now in Palestinian demonstrations are labeled anti-Semites. Waving the Palestinian flag, as I've just seen a report. Somebody was arrested in Manchester just today for waving the Palestinian flag, breach of peace, etc., etc. We're seeing the buttering up of the whole population in the West for an even bigger campaign of ethnic cleansing in Gaza and other occupied areas, and that's just started. So this is the stuff, I think, the kind of things we can agree on, and I'm sure we don't have too many different opinions on these issues here. There are a few other questions, though, we should discuss tonight, I think, because we are socialists and we have to get to the heart of the matter. For example, the role of Hamas. It's clearly not a socialist organization, and many socialists will look at the footage we've seen from Israel and find that very horrific. And on a human level, there've been, of course, very one-sided reporting. It's turned out today that the babies that were beheaded, that seems to be totally made up. We also hear reports from Israelis who say Hamas fighters were very kind to them and protected women and children, etc. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, because there's always the truth is always the first victim in these cases. In any case, it's a national liberation movement, and so it doesn't adhere to socialist principles. What kind of attitude should we take then? And I should say at this point we are witnessing a harsh clamping down on free speech on the issue of Palestine at the moment, and Hamas, which is already banned here in the UK, but now expressing support for Hamas might end you up getting into huge difficulties and perhaps even some kind of criminal offense. So, as always, comrades are choosing their words wisely already, I'm sure, but do think about those kind of things when you put up your hand later on to speak, perhaps. So I want to know from our speaker, Tony Greenstein, tonight, we want to like to hear his thoughts of what's going on. What is the strategy of Hamas? Because it does look a bit, it is, of course, an act of desperation. We can understand where it comes from, but has it perhaps given the Israeli state an opportunity to, move to the right, to attack the Palestinians even more, extend ethnic cleansing, as we said, and, to divert from its own problems? So it is as a strategy, I think we would need to understand it a bit better than I do, for example. So I would like to hear Tony's views on that. What's the strategy of the Israeli government? Will it really want to wipe out Hamas when in the past it's actually been Netanyahu was quite happy to co-live with Hamas and let the Gaza Strip to them to sort it out. These are all kind of questions we want to discuss. And most importantly, of course, any solution. What is the solution? One state, two state, a regional solution. These are huge questions. We might not know all the answers to, but we certainly want to make a start with discussing them, because it's very one-sided, as I said, in the media, and we need to understand what's going on. So thank you very much, Tony, for joining us. He'll speak for about 30 minutes, and then we open up for questions and contributions. This is a webinar, so we're doing that for security and safety reasons. So if you want to speak, please click raise hand, which is under reactions, and we can take you in later. Welcome, Tony.
Okay, thank you, comrades. Can I just say that I am speaking from the south of France, about 20 miles from Perpignan in French Catalonia, and I haven't really kept up with the news. So some of you will know more and be more abreast of current events than I am, but I hope I've got something of the picture as to what has happened. I think the attack on Sunday was a surprise to everyone, not least, of course, the Israelis themselves. I was quite amazed at the capability of the attackers. Obviously, their rocket defense attacks have improved immensely. The fact that they can now reach Tel Aviv, for example, the ingenuity in the attack, whereas the Israelis thought they'd closed off any possibility of an attack through the tunnels. What they did was come straight over the so-called border, or really what is a fence surrounding Gaza, and demolished various military outposts, putting the army to flight before then attacking nearby settlements, towns, and etc. So that clearly was a surprise to us. But in retrospect, of course, it shouldn't be a surprise, because given what Gaza has suffered, 17 years of a siege, a stifling siege, nothing could go in or go out without the Israeli state's approval. No one could reach it by sea, and those who tried were attacked, and some of them were killed. The Gaza airport was not allowed to function and is now in complete ruins. The population register is controlled by Israel. It is in every sense an occupied territory, and it was under a stifling siege. So there is no doubt whatsoever that anyone who considers themselves a socialist or an anti-imperialist supports the right of the oppressed to fight back, and in particular supports this particular attack, which we would see as a defensive, not an aggressive attack. It's a response to the thousands of deaths that Israel has caused in the last 15, in fact, in the last half century or more of occupation. The other thing, of course, is the inability of Israel to realize what was happening. And it is clearly a major intelligence failure. Now, I've heard some people say, well, the Israelis knew, but they allowed it to happen because then they were going to be able to take advantage of it. I know it's easier to resort to conspiracy theories and so on, but I really don't buy into that. I think we have to accept that it was a major intelligence failure. However, that doesn't mean that the Israeli state wasn't given warning. There was an article yesterday in the Middle East Monitor that Egypt had tipped them off that something big was likely to happen. We don't know whether they supplied any details or not. But like in 1973, and this is the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, Israel was overcome with overconfidence, hubris, the belief that Palestinians were not capable of mounting such an attack. And naturally, this has caused a major, major surprise. The other thing that I think I should say at the outset, although we give, or we should give, unconditional support to the attack by Hamas and other resistance movements against Israel, that doesn't mean that we would necessarily agree with all of their tactics. Their tactics are for them, not for us. It's irrelevant as far as we're concerned what they did, and to criticize them really serves no purpose either. But that doesn't mean we support them. So we give unconditional but critical support to what has happened. But we've also seen the hypocrisy of the West, which has described this as an attack which was unprovoked. And just imagine, for example, that Britain was attacked and occupied by a foreign power. Does anyone believe for a moment that if we launched a counterattack, that would be classified as unprovoked? And whatever your views on the Russian-Ukrainian war, does anyone say that the fight back by Ukrainian forces against Russia is also unprovoked? I mean, the hypocrisy of the mass media is staggering. But what it really says is they accept as a normal situation Israeli rule in those areas, but they don't consider them occupied. They do, in fact, accept de facto that they are Israeli territories, and therefore Palestinian resistance is to be classified as terrorism. And of course, it's a very strange definition of terrorism, because to most people, what is terrorism? Terrorism is leaving a bomb on a bus or planting a bomb in a railway station. It's usually an individual act of terror aimed at changing the political situation, or in a case of the state, it's the mass bombing and infliction of casualties on a civilian population. That is terrorism, and there's no greater terrorism than the terrorism of the Israeli state, which, let us not forget, was born in terrorism. Whether it was the terrorism of the gun, which is from where Netanyahu derives his political legacy, if you like, which bombed the King David Hotel in 1946, killing 92 people and I think injuring about 50 people, or the terrorism of Haganah and the other Zionist militias, which systematically razed to the ground the Arab villages, massacring in about 30 different places the populations of those villages in order to put to flight the Palestinian refugees in 1948. And there is a direct line between 1948 and today, because when Hamas tells the Israelis to get out of Ashkelon, what they're really saying is the residents of Gaza have the right to return to Ashkelon, from where many of them derive. But I just do want to touch on one of the things that Tina raised, which is the question of use of the Terrorism Act, not to combat terror, not to stop ISIS planting bombs in Britain, but to clamp down on free speech that they don't like. And the first thing they've done is, of course, to prescribe not only Hamas, its military wing, but its political wing as well, and also to prescribe Hezbollah. I think it needs to be said loud and clear, because it's the Home Secretary's decision as to what organisation is prescribed. It's a political decision. It's not a factual decision. It's not a decision taken on evidence. The Hamas and Hezbollah are not terrorist organisations. They are resistance organisations or liberation organisations. And anyone who says they are terrorist organisations is really indulging in nothing but hyperbole at best. I mean, it was Lord Carrington who was Thatcher's first foreign minister, and probably one of the more astute members of the ruling class. We haven't, he was one of the old Tory Arabists, I guess. who said that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, and that's absolutely right. Because we look at, say, the Nazi occupation of France during the war, or Yugoslavia, they termed those they were fighting against bandits or terrorists. It depends what perspective you're coming from, which side you are on, in a sense, as to who is branded a terrorist and who's not branded a terrorist. But it has nothing to do with the actual meaning of the word terrorism, which is when you think of Russian anarchists planting bombs and hoping by deeds alone that they will then stimulate the mass population to move against the powers that be, and so on. But the question really is, what are the political repercussions of this attack? And I think I'm fairly confident in saying that nothing will be the same after the attack as before it. And I think that was one of the main aspects of Hamas's strategy, insofar as it has a strategy. And I'm not convinced it has any long-term strategy. We see, I mean, when we say that Israel has laid siege to Gaza, it would not have been able to do that without a willing collaboration and complicity of the Egyptian regime, one of the most horrific regimes in the world in terms of its imprisonment, its hanging of people, its use of torture, and so on. But of course, it's a friend of America and therefore one of our allies. I mean, this is the nature of the so-called ethical foreign policy that the West conducts. But the Egyptian regime is a totally collaborationist regime. It's a quizzling regime. It's a regime which holds its own population in a vice. And it's not very different from other regimes across the Middle East, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, or the Iraqi regime, which has been put in place by the Americans, which is also extremely repressive, or the Turkish regime, you name it, or the Gulf regimes to a large extent, and so on. The Middle East is dotted by corrupt regimes which see their own populations as the enemy. Because although these regimes have got into bed with Israel through the Abraham Accords and what is called normalization, we can see from the demonstrations across the Middle East where the sympathy of the people lie, and they lie with the Palestinians, not with the Israeli state, or for that matter, their own regimes. And we saw that in Qatar last year in the World Cup, when Arabs who came to it made it very, very clear where their sympathies lie. So we should never confuse the collaboration and the quizzling nature of the regimes in the Arab world, which are the allies, the open allies now. They were closet allies, of course, of Israel, with the people themselves. What I asked are the political repercussions. Well, the initial response, of course, of Netanyahu has been to threaten to raise Gaza to the ground, to reduce it to rubble. And he's told its inhabitants to get out. And of course, there's nowhere to get out to. They can't get out to the sea. They can't get out to Egypt. They certainly can't get out to Israel. So, I mean, this is a promise of the infliction of major war crimes by the Israeli state, with the blessing of Joe Biden, Sunak, and the European Union. And that is where our campaign has to be focused in the coming weeks and months. It is to ensure that Israel is not able to carry out in Gaza the ethnic cleansing that it would so desire, because at the beginning in November last year, when there were elections in Israel, a new far-right coalition came to power. Now, the ideas of that coalition, and in particular the religious Zionist element, which consists of Jewish fascists and really neo-Nazis, let's be quite honest, people who openly glorify in the shedding of Arab blood, people like Police Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, or Bezalel Smotrich, who combines the finance minister with being the Gauleiter of the West Bank. They who called for the wiping out, literally, of the Palestinian town of Huwara. There is no amount of Palestinian blood that is shed that they will regret. And indeed, Smotrich, in the last Knesset, addressed the members of the joint list, the Communist Party Hadash, and said, "You are here by mistake because Ben Gurion did not finish the job in 1948. So you have, on the one hand, Zionists in this country, represented by Zippy Hotaveli, the Israeli ambassador, a religious nut, who says that Nakba is an Arab lie. In Israel, you have the far right no longer denying the Nakba, but promising to reenact it. And that's really what the strategy of Ben Gurion, of Netanyahu is in the West Bank, in fact, both the West Bank and Gaza. It is a policy of ongoing ethnic cleansing, just as you've had that in a sense in Israel since 1948 itself, with the so-called policy of Judaization of the Negev and the Galilee, and we see the Judaization of East Jerusalem as well. So Israel as an ethno-nationalist state is an inherently racist state, a state which wakes up in the middle of the night and counts how many people are born in the night who are Arabs. Are we in danger of losing our Jewish majority, and so on? That is the nature of the Israeli state, and it does mean, of course, an interclass alliance between the Israeli ruling class and the Israeli working class. How that will fall out, or how that will play out in terms of the attack of Hamas, because clearly it has upset the Zionist psyche immensely, remains to be seen. But I think one thing we can say today, if we ask what are the political repercussions, is that the strategy of normalization, I think, will be all but dead. I very, very much doubt that Saudi Arabia will go ahead now with opening diplomatic relations with Israel. I may be wrong on that. You can never underestimate the treachery of the Arab regimes, but it's clearly going to have major political repercussions in much the same way as the 1973 war did, because before the war, Israel refused to enter into any form of peace treaty with Egypt, which meant handing over the Sinai Desert. But after that, under American pressure, they buckled and signed the Camp David Accord, and that accord, unfortunately, has lasted 50 years. So I think those will be the main repercussions. The other, of course, aspect is what happens in the north of Israel with Hezbollah. Will Hezbollah be dragged into a conflict? It's clearly unwilling to enlarge the battlefront, if you like, to open a second front in the north, but it may yet be compelled to do so, not least by the Israeli attacks and so on. And it may well be that Netanyahu believes that, having now decided to try and solve the problem of Hamas and Gaza, he will also try and find a solution to Hezbollah by waging a war on the northern front as well. That remains to be seen. I don't have a crystal ball, and it's impossible to second guess what the major actors will do. But clearly, those are the main outlines of the apartheid state of Israel. But our focus has to be on the utter hypocrisy of the Western states, who condemn what has been happening as anti-Semitism, and the campaign against anti-Semitism has been doing its best to tie in attacks on Israelis with attacks on Jews in this country, to try and draw a straight line between the two when no such line exists, because it's part of the Zionist mythology that Palestinians attack Israelis, not because of what Israel has done to them, but because they are Jewish. That is the fundamental basis of the false anti-Semitism narrative that we're all so familiar with inside and outside the Labour Party. As I say, everything really is up for grabs, but we have a battle closer to home as well, which is a determined resistance to the attempts to categorize or classify support for the Palestinians as having anything to do with terrorism. And we have to be quite clear about that. Suella Braverman, who's the most racist Home Secretary I think I've ever known, is all over the question of anti-Semitism. She is extremely concerned about anti-Jewish racism, but no other forms of racism, where she lets loose with her own stereotypes and categorization. I mean, she's only been recently pulled up for saying that nearly all grooming attacks in Britain on children are Pakistani, and she had to be reminded that the statistics of her own Home Office proved quite to the contrary. But we have people or creatures like this who are determined to try and get the British state to clamp down on support for the Palestinians, just as it has been in Europe, whether it's in France or in Germany and in Berlin. It's virtually impossible to hold an open support, a demonstration in support of the Palestinians. So the Western imperialists have hitched their wagon, if you like, to Zionism, and that was always the case. I mean, there are some people are really who are stupid. I can give no other description, who believe that the West wouldn't support Israel if it wasn't for a Jewish lobby or Jews in this country, America, etc. The history of Western support for Zionism has always been that the Western ruling classes, the bourgeoisie, supported Zionism well before the Jewish populations of their country did. And it was only with reluctance at times that Jews came round to the support of Zionism. And that was really after the Holocaust. So we are now seeing a total weaponization of anti-Semitism in the attempt to portray what the Palestinians in Gaza have done as anti-Semitic, when of course it's nothing of the kind. So I don't know how long I've gone on for.
You can do another 5 minutes or so.
Well, I'm quite happy to stop there because I think what's more important is that people come back with questions and contributions and so on. Can I just say that there's over, I think it's 100, is it? I can't see.
No, we had over 200 people already have been in the meeting. We're currently 150. So
yes, so it's a really well-attended meeting, this as well. So I'm very pleased that there is such interest. And so people are going to, I think the main thing is that the fight for the Palestinians, which is a fight for our own liberation as well from our own ruling classes, is going to have to be conducted under more and more adverse conditions where the state clamps down. We've seen that with the Palestine Action attacks on the Elbit, the Israeli arms factory. I mean, I myself am currently under a suspended sentence, as were my fellow defendants. There are other trials coming up, and it's important, very important, that people do give solidarity to those who are under attack and put themselves on the front line. But it's also important that we give, in whatever way possible, support to the Palestinians at this crucial time. And in particular, we try to preempt and prevent the commission of war crimes by Israel in the Gaza Strip. They've given notice that that's what they want to do, and it's up to us to try and stop them. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. Comrades, if you have a question or contribution, please click raise hand and I can bring you in. Tony, a couple of questions first. So you're saying that the Hamas's strategy, as far as it goes, probably more of a tactic, is to stop what has become a sort of normalization almost of the oppression of the Palestinians. There was negotiations going on with Saudi Arabia, Egypt as well, which are traditionally obviously pro-Palestinian states, but they were getting closer to Israel, and that is the main reason to do this now?
Yeah, I think the political goals of Hamas, insofar as they have political goals, because they're really the Palestinian wing of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood is
Mm.
to break the logjam politically, which has developed over the last few years with Trump's Abraham Accords, which Biden has taken up, despite his promises that he would freeze out Saudi Arabia because of the involvement of MBS in Jamal Khashoggi's murder. All of that has gone by the way, in a sense. The Americans know that they need the Arab regimes, however despicable they may be. I imagine that most of Hamas's efforts have gone into planning what has been an incredibly successful attack on Israel's underbelly. And I should really point out that the Israeli army, which has become used to shooting defenseless children, women, civilians, and so on in the West Bank, seems to have lost its ability to actually fight on the ground against adversaries who are also armed, because Hamas just swept like a butter like a knife through a butter through the military installations that were surrounding the Gaza Strip and put the soldiers to flight. I think they've killed about 120 Israeli soldiers, which is quite something. So I think we have an Israeli army which is so used to relying on high tech, bombing from on high and so on, that they've forgotten how it is that you might conduct ground warfare, in a sense, which was their problem, of course, in Lebanon in 2006, when they eventually went in to fight Hezbollah. They came off second best and quickly retreated. So the Israeli army is not all that it's cracked up to be. But we have to point out, I mean, they condemn Hamas for killing civilians. But when you bomb with high explosives homes on the ground, how is that any different? Quite the contrary. I mean, Hamas, we know, has in situations spared, children have not been killed. Israeli bombs make no discrimination whatsoever. So again, that is simply the hypocrisy of our beloved mass media and our craven politicians, not least of whom is Keir Starmer, who you can't put a piece of paper between him, Sunak, Braverman, and Biden. And today the Labour Party is really just another capitalist party, as far as I'm concerned, anyway.
We might disagree on that, but let's not get into that. I'm not a fan of the Labour Party, I should say, under Starmer. But I mean, as socialists, we'll have, if we look at the program, if we did regard the program and the tactics of Hamas, we might be critical and we might criticize that it will, this is now leading to further and increased mass slaughter in Palestine, which Hamas now knows. I mean, it's not our program, as you say, and I would be slightly more critical, and I wouldn't call for unconditional support, for sure. Critical, if yes, but how is Hamas then seen, you think, in the Palestinian population? Is it a blanket support for Hamas, or are there critical voices?
I'm sure there are critical voices, but the prestige of Hamas and also Islamic Jihad will have gone up immensely as a result of this successful attack, because there's been nothing like it, really, since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. The PLO sold out with the Oslo Accords. They sold their birthrights, as I said in an article I wrote in 1993 for Briefing, for a mess of pottage, the old biblical analogy of Jacob and Esau. It's the PLO, Fatah, and Mahmoud Abbas, the so-called president, who's now called the mayor of Ramallah, are utterly discredited. They're just subcontractors for the Israeli state. I'm sure that Hamas realized that Israel would then obviously would overcome the attacks eventually, and then would inflict severe damage and reprisals. I'm sure they built that into their calculations. But they also realized they probably have no other choice but to do it. And therefore, they concentrated on ensuring that they could make as big an impact as possible. I don't know, obviously, I'm not privy to their thinking, but I imagine that is what they did. and they didn't think about the long-term consequences too much, because it is really difficult to predict. And in many ways, nothing is for certain and nothing is guaranteed. It's up to us, in a sense, to put pressure on our own governments to ensure that Israel doesn't carry out what it's the.
Yeah, indeed, that is our task here now, isn't it, as socialists in Britain, to stop our government from offering. I mean, Rishi Sunak did it straight away, offered military and even more financial support, and who knows, British soldiers in the Middle East. Jesus. Before we open up, though, what's the solution? You still have people arguing for two-state solution, although William Hague saying today in the Times, even he's understands that ship has sailed, although the Egyptian government, I think, it wants to play mediator and to work out a two-state solution. I mean, just like the one-state solution, it doesn't seem particularly realistic. What's your view on it?
Well, two states is simply not a runner. I mean, not simply on practical grounds. Where would you put a two-state? I mean, if the settlements are sprawled over the majority of the West Bank, it's clearly impossible. And the settlements have been designed and located in order to prevent a contiguous two-state solution. But, when in 1993, I was one of the very few people who opposed the Oslo Accords. I mean, I said then that Zionism wasn't created in order to settle 3/4 or 5/8 or whatever fraction of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, which incidentally is not the borders of the state of Israel. The land of Israel is the biblical land of Israel, and it goes up to the Litani in the Lebanon, across to the Euphrates in Egypt, and down to the brook of the Nile in Egypt. So there's plenty of room for expansion in the coming years. But Israel was not founded in order to give the Palestinians a fraction of their own territory. Israel was founded as a Jewish state, and a Jewish state in all of Palestine. And that therefore means ethnic cleansing was built into it from the start. And they were quite open about it. I mean, Herzl spoke about spiriting the penniless population across the border. They didn't openly advertise it in the initial stages because of the fear of reaction, but the Arabs soon woke up to it, and the rest is history. But in 1948, they carried out their plans, because you can't have a Jewish state where a majority is not Jewish. I mean, that makes sense. And any ethno-religious state, whether it's Israel or Christian, is inherently racist. So the solution has to be a democratic, secular state of Palestine. But of course, the Palestinians are not by themselves strong enough to do that. That's the difference with South Africa. And so there is a need for a revolution in the Arab East, and the overthrow of the Arab regimes which Israel is supported to guard over. So there is an interconnection between all of these things. If the Arab regimes, Egypt, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Sheikhdoms, and so on, were to fall, then the viability of the Zionist project itself would be left in doubt. But none of us has a crystal ball. But the present situation cannot continue and will not continue. And whatever else happens, things will not be the same now after that's happened.
Without recognising that actually there are
as it was before.
Yeah. Indeed. Thank you very much, Tony. Got a few people with their hands up now. If you could try to keep your contribution or your question short, then we can get a lot of people in. Ian was first. Hi.
Good evening, comrades. Just a brief contribution and a brief question. Firstly, we don't have to support Hamas, in the sense that Hamas would slaughter socialists in biblical numbers, just as they would be happy to engage in war against the Zionists. But our enemy's enemy isn't always our friend. Having said that, it's undoubtedly the case that this is an entirely justifiable resistance to 70 years of ethnic cleansing on the part of the Zionist state, and I think we should be completely unequivocal about that. It has surprised me just how much has been achieved by Hamas. But this leads me on to the question, really, was the attitude of Egypt. Egypt, if it were to open its borders and effectively the population of Gaza pour into Egypt, because they've got to run somewhere, they're being slaughtered. I mean, what we're seeing now isn't merely ethnic cleansing, it's actually genocide. If they were to just pour across the border, the last thing that Egypt will want is Hamas on their borders, and no particular love of the impoverished Palestinians either. So I'm interested to know what you think might happen there. Secondly, it seems likely now that Hezbollah will probably engage the Israeli Defense Force as well, and proposing an enormous challenge. In thinking about the people who join Hamas, I doubt very much whether there is much choice about whether you join it or not, or whether you have much say in its ideological profile. From my knowledge of Iraq, something like 70% of men were unemployed at one time, and actually becoming an insurgent was a career move. People didn't have an awful lot of choice in the matter. And interestingly, I don't know much about the Israeli Defense Force, but presumably not everybody who gets called up, and it's universal conscription with a few exceptions for very orthodox religious people. Almost the whole of Israeli society is militarized, and I can't imagine for one moment that anybody would regard that with any great getting their call-up papers with any degree of pleasure, especially when they know they're being sent out to do things which are utterly heinous as well. So, firstly, the question I wanted to ask was about what your perspective is on what Egypt is likely to do.
Okay, let's take a couple more, Tony, otherwise we'll never get through all the speakers who've got their hands up. Una, please.
You're muted.
Sorry. Hi, Tony. Lucky you in south of France. I'm so jealous. That's my part of the world. Anyway, I've just heard tonight a lot of Jewish are coming from all over the world to go and fight the mother country. Did you hear about that one? They're joining the military. That's tonight on the news. They are flying from all over the world to save the mother country, i.e. Israel. Have you heard about that one?
I haven't myself. No.
It was tonight on the news. And another thing I got on Monday Vice, the shift, Blicken did its call for ceasefire while Israeli defense minister orders complete siege of Gaza. It's the latest today. So what do you think of that? I mean, I'm totally heartbroken for 3 days. I've lost the plot actually, because where are we going now? And going back to Hamas, okay, Hamas, when you're desperate and Palestine is desperate. I was there 4 years ago. I was attacked by IDF people because I was helping the olive harvest, And when you are desperate, you do a lot of bad things. But it wasn't. They are helping. They are trying to. They're desperate. And if you corner me, I would do the same thing. Sorry to say. That's it. What do you think, Tony?
Okay, we take one more person and then Tony can come back. Thank you. Thank you, Conrad.
Thank you, Tina.
Okay, who was next? Harry.
Hi, comrades. Let's first of all deal with this contentious issue now that's faced for the entire movement who backs Palestine, Hamas. That offensive on Saturday, when they moved into the Israeli settlements, gunned down in the most indiscriminate form, men and women, and also at that concert where they moved in and gunned down over 250 youth. No one in their right mind can justify or defend that action. Nobody. And I hear this argument that, well, look what Israel has done. And look what they do every single day. Gunning down youth, brutality. They abduct people, even from the young age of 10. the horror of putting them in camps, interrogating in Israel, and subject them to the utmost brutality and torture, that, oh, they do it, so that justifies our actions. There is no justification to do what Israel does to the people of Palestine, from Hamas or anyone else. I have never believed that Hamas represents the true interests of Palestinian people. Ian put it up to what would maybe do to socialists. That's indeed possible. But what they do to Palestinians is to oppress Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. They clamp down on their rights. They want to control Palestinian people, and they want to do it for their own ends. Now, exactly the reason, what was the motive behind Hamas? Remember, this would not have happened had it not been for Iran. Iran is behind this, the military power behind this. It is possible it all went wrong on Saturday, because when they opened up those 20 incursions, broke down the fence, and believe me, they should break down the fence, they should break it all down. But when those incursions opened up, they went on a military offensive, perhaps expecting the floodgates to open up and the people of Palestine would come out behind them in their military offensive. If that was the plan, it certainly went wrong. It did not happen. But it does beg the question, what was the real motive behind Hamas? Did they want perhaps a more diplomatic position? Are they acting simply in the interests of Iran and are all the Arab states that are surrounding Israel? We don't know the full answer to this. What's immediate at the minute is this massacre that's taking place inside Palestine as we speak, and that the ground incursion of the IDF that's about to go in there. There is one target, and that is the people. It will be to shoot everything that owns. Finally, Tina, I mean, we talk about one state, two state solutions, all this type of thing. There is no solution under a capitalist basis to the freedom of the people of Palestine and to the freedom. What we need to be doing is encouraging the people of Palestine. We support them internationally, massive support, but to appeal to the advanced layer of people in Israel. They're the ones, and they're people who are there will support the Palestinian cause against Netanyahu. That is what we appeal to, the unity of the people of Palestine along with the advanced layer of the Jewish people. That is the way forward on our socialist basis. Okay, Tina.
Thank you, Harry. What do you think, Tony? Then can some Israelis be won over?
No, all the evidence proves the contrary. Even the Zionist left has almost disappeared into insignificance. The second largest political party in the 1949 elections in Israel was Mapam, the so-called Marxist Zionists. Today they've been eliminated from the Knesset as Meretz. The Israeli Labour Party, which formed governments for the first 30 years, is left with 4 members of the Knesset and is tipped not to get re-elected to the Knesset. The anti-Zionist left in Israel is and always has been extremely tiny because, let us face it, when you have a settler colonial population, there are very few people within that population who disavow the privileges that they are given. The vast majority of Israeli Jews are Zionists, and to look for salvation to the tiny minority of anti-Zionists is just to foster illusions. It won't happen. It hasn't happened. And as Martin Luther King said in his letter from Birmingham jail, which he wrote to the white pastors who said, "Why are you doing all this, going on all these protests, upsetting people?" He said, "No one who has privileges willingly gives them up." And that is the truth of the matter. Harry is absolutely wrong when he says Iran is pulling the strings or Iran is behind this. That is the actual story that Netanyahu is trying to get across, and a story to that effect was placed in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, that Iran had concocted all of this. I don't believe it for one moment. Hamas is its own agent. It made the decision. It will accept help from whoever it can, but it took the decision, and I doubt if Iran even knew of what was going to happen until it happened. So I reject that idea that Palestinians are somehow operating as the puppets of others. They have their own agency, and we shouldn't dismiss that. Now, of course, what happened in many of the settlements, the massacre of many of the party goers, and so on, will not accord with our humanitarian and liberal consciences, and all of us will resile from that. But we are not in a situation where we've lived in a suffocating siege for 17 years, where we've seen people die of ordinary illnesses, cancer, and so on, because they can't get the medical treatment because Israel has denied it. We haven't had our hospitals bombed. And in the last mini war in 2021, although Israel refrained from bombing the Shifa hospital, the main hospital in Gaza, because of the international repercussions, what they did do was bomb the roads leading up to it, preventing ambulances getting there. So Israel has always waged these genocidal wars, and it's promising to do that today, and that is our main task. But I don't think that we should therefore withdraw our support. I made it clear that we should support the attack, the offensive by Hamas and the other groups without necessarily endorsing any of their tactics. Their tactics are up to them. How they conduct their struggle is up to them. It's just like in the Second World War, we would have supported the Russians' offensive against the Nazis, but did we therefore support the mass rape of German women? Of course not. Did we support many of the other things they did? Absolutely not. But did we support them against the Nazi enemy? Yes. And for the very same reasons, we support the Palestinian offensive against the Israelis. And that's what I mean by unconditional but critical support. As to Hamas itself, well, Hamas was in many ways the creation of Israel in 1987. The military governor, under instructions, Yitzhak Segev, I think his name was, gave money to the Islamic foundations that Hamas was running. Why? Because they wanted to undermine the secular Palestinian nationalist groups, like, for example, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is also quite strong in Gaza, incidentally. We should be under no illusions. I mean, clearly, Hamas doesn't run a nice liberal regime in Gaza, but there are other political currents in Gaza, and we should never forget that. We should not simply buy into Israeli propaganda. As far as the comments from Ellis are concerned, yes, I agree. We can't put ourselves in the place of the Palestinians who have been through a suffocating siege, a siege which has killed thousands, not only directly from Israeli bombs and missiles and so on, but indirectly through food shortages, medical shortages, and so on. So it's not our position, it's not our purpose, and it's not our role to say how they should fight. They make that decision for themselves. The only question we have is that we give them support. The first comment was, I think I've forgotten it now. It was by Ian, but maybe you can remind me what his.
Well, he was more critical of Hamas, I guess. I'm not sure if there was a question.
Yeah, I mean, Hamas is an Islamist organization. The struggle of the Palestinians isn't an Islamic struggle. It isn't a religious struggle. It's a political struggle. Hamas was, when it started, was an extremely reactionary anti-socialist movement, but it has transformed into a resistance movement, which just goes to show. I mean, Israel, in a sense, created its own Frankenstein, and that's not the first time, of course. We saw the United States do that in Afghanistan, and then in Iraq. They fostered the jihadi movement, and then all of a surprise wondered why they were bitten by them when they didn't get what they want. So, I mean, none of this is is new at all, but we can be extremely critical of Hamas, and I am. If anyone looks at my blog, you will see I've been very critical of them for their attacks on women and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, they are the only force that counts in Gaza alongside Islamic Jihad. So yes, one gives them support. One should do no other.
Oh, sorry, Tony. Ian just clarified. He asked about the likelihood of Egypt opening its border to allow.
Oh, right. Yes, that's right. I don't think Egypt wants to open its border, because if it did want to, and there's been various hints by Israel that maybe they could resettle the Gazans in the middle of the Sinai Desert, I don't think they want to for one moment, because it's a regime which, although extremely repressive, which is also extremely fragile. It doesn't have a mass base. I certainly don't think it wants to take on board what it considers Israel's problem. So I don't think it will do that willingly at all. And so Israel, to some extent, is stuck with the problem of Gaza. And it won't be allowed to, of course, get away with the genocide it would like to carry out. I mean, if Ben Gvir and Smotrich had their way, they would literally wipe out every single person in Gaza. But the world community, if you like, people in the imperialist countries and so on, will not stand for the mass slaughter that Israel wants to conduct. But as far as Egypt is concerned, I can't see them opening their borders willingly. They may be forced to, but it won't be a willing gesture on their part.
Thank you, Tony. Steve Freeman, and apologies.
That's all right, Tina.
I'm supposed to be coming in first. Hi.
Oh, there I am. So where have I gone to? And there I am.
Yeah.
Hi, Tony, and hope you're enjoying your holiday.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if you insofar as you can, it's not meant to be. I was sounding a bit flippant there, and it's not a flippant situation. Okay. Obviously, there's so many points to be made, so I'm just going to focus on one or two and not all of them. And I think I wanted to focus on, all of which you sort of covered in various ways. I wanted to focus a little bit on England, or the battle that is developing here and the reaction of the English working class to these events and the movement to these events. Because as we know, Palestinian supporters are coming under attack. So we need to get our politics in a strong place. I believe there is a lot of support in England for the Palestinian people. I was trying to look around. I was trying to look up an opinion poll, but I couldn't get one. So far, I've only got one in 2002. But the one in 2002, which is 20 years ago, way out of date in some ways, the only one I could find at the moment, said that that 28% of people supported the Palestinians and only 14% of voters supported the Israelis. And I have no reason to believe that has changed. If anything, it would have been greater. But obviously, I'm interested to know what that is. But there has been. Let's put it like this. Now, the ruling class are obviously will be trying very hard to reverse that. Corbyn, of course, was part of that, of spreading that idea. You said something in one of your blogs, and I noticed it about English. Well, it's about English hypocrisy. It's about hypocrisy. But I was thinking of English hypocrisy because the English are famed for our obsession with class and rank and snobbery and deference, but also for our hypocrisy, because we love to pass moral judgments on people in other countries of which we know very little. And your blog, Tony, said something about the hypocrisy of those who support the Ukrainian resistance and condemn the Palestinian resistance. And I'm one of those people. I want to avoid that trap. I'm somebody who supports the resistance of the Ukrainians and the Palestinians, not to fall into that trap. But I think we have to make something out of that. That is one of the arguments, a way that the government and Labour support the resistance in Ukraine and completely ignore the Palestinians. So that's an argument I think that we can use in the wider movement. I noticed that the crown, as it were, the government, the crown, the ruling class, if you want to call it that way, are actually trying to get the English. They're trying to get they will have a minute's silence at the football game going on at Wembley on Friday or Saturday, and they can't decide whether to have a minute's silence for Israel, which might lead to some booing. They're not sure about that. Or the better plan, safer option, is to put a lighting up on the Wembley arch of the Israeli flag. And of course, the Crown has put the flag on public buildings like Downing Street, along with the Union Jack. And of course, Braverman has warned it may be a criminal offence to wave the Palestinian flag in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And she's been sending out letters to the chief constables to get them to act. And in one of these letters, it says she would urge them to clamp down on any attempts to use flags, songs, or swastikas. I mean, has anybody except Nazis been parading with swastikas? Obviously not. And I mean, and many neo-fascists support Zionism and hence wave the Israeli flag. There's a whole argument there to be sort of taken up. But one of the things I think is really important, and it's probably my first point, is I think is the question of peace. We started to talk about that. At a time of war, I think we have to speak openly of peace. Obviously not the peace of Netanyahu's government, the peace of mass killings, the peace of the graveyard, but peace with justice, a democratic peace that could be supported by the majority of Israelis and the majority of Palestinians. A peace that could be voted on in a referendum held in Israel and Palestine, which is what happened in the Good. Now, however we're going to formulate it, we have to get our act together on that argument. I mean, I therefore commend Jeremy Corbyn for raising the question of peace in his statement, which of course it was entirely the right question for us to take up. And of course he was then slaughtered in the media for being a Hamas supporter and all the rest of it. But I think we have to push that boat out wherever we can. Now, Republican Labour Education Forum, we're going to put forward just a meeting next Monday on a peace plan and for discussion next week. So I think all people would be welcome if they want to come and discuss that with us, because I think we have to really think this out and we have to get it really strong. A couple of thoughts just on war, and I think who is to blame. I think we haven't mentioned who is to blame. Who should we blame for this situation? Well, we haven't mentioned that we ought to blame America and the UK because their policy has failed, and it's failed to establish a just peace. And you could argue it was never able or never capable of doing that. And then we have to blame the Netanyahu government for this. And I was reading an article in Haaretz. You can see the reference to it. An article in Haaretz saying, this is today in Haaretz, saying by Nehima Shratzler, I don't know the person, Netanyahu must resign now. He says Hamas's surprise attack against Israel is the worst failure of the country's history. It's more serious than even the failure of the Yom Kippur War. And he gives the reasons why it's more disastrous on many levels. There is no person to blame for this terrible disaster. There's one person to blame for this terrible disaster, Benjamin Netanyahu. And he lists all of Netanyahu's crimes of corruption and incompetence. And then he slates the opposition of Gantz and Lapid and Lieberman for crawling into bed with this crook, Netanyahu. And there are similar articles in Haaretz. Netanyahu, a gang leader who cannot. Now, if we remember that the background to this was this mass mobilization on the streets, and we may be skeptical of all of that, but it doesn't mean that movement and these events aren't somehow going to fuse together. That's what makes it slightly different. Now, obviously, Netanyahu wants to use these events to gather everybody around him in national unity, but it may prove to be much more difficult. So I think the situation is much more complicated, and the political repercussions of this, well, we don't know what they are, but I think you have got to look at that mass movement as well as this. Now, I'm going to stop there, Tina, so other people can get in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Luke, please.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for this discussion. I'm here in the United States, and I thought I'd bring in, perhaps some of the perspective from the U.S. Maybe just very briefly on the Anthony Blinken tweet, the Secretary of State here in the U.S. I suppose he did tweet something calling for some type of peace solution, and then they're very quickly, I think, retracted that tweet and then, stood behind Joe Biden and next to the Vice President Kamala Harris when Joe Biden basically said to Israel that, do whatever you want and we'll give you full support. The thing that I'm interested in is how a group that I'm involved in, the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, reacts to these events, because the DSA is a socialist organization here that endorses and seeks the support of elected officials here in the U.S. And so the question is, okay, the DSA as of 2017 supports the BDS movement, is an anti-Zionist organization. Well, then what happens when our elected officials, so to speak, basically toe the line in regards to giving military support to Israel? So one question I think that socialists here in the United States have to ask themselves is, okay, how do we keep elected officials accountable? How do we continue to encourage that narrative of looking at the United States? It's very easy for folks to kind of condemn violence and what's going on, and then to forget to then turn around and say, actually, it's this country that continues to give X, Y, and Z amount of military aid, and ensure that this can continue happening. So this event is posing that question to the DSA in a very stark way. It happened a little bit a few years ago in regards to an elected who gave support for funding the Iron Dome, but now it's really going to start. Are there red lines that the DSA will hold its electeds accountable to, so on and so forth? Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. Well, they've been terrible on Ukraine, haven't they? Who's next? Marion, please.
Yeah, I think this is a very important time. On Sunday, myself and Auntie joined other people in Birmingham City Centre. It was a big show of support for what's going and supporting Palestine. I give uncritical support to the Palestinian people, and I don't think en masse would necessarily exist unless it had some base within its population. And I agree with Tony, we have to give critical support. It's not our job to tell them how to conduct their struggle. And I think we have a big responsibility in this country, in particular, because the state of Israel would not be the state of Israel if Britain hadn't done what it did. And I think that our main task now is to stop what's going on in Gaza. We have to hold our own government to account. And one of the things that we need to do is to stop what Tony's been involved in, stop the military arms deals with Israel. We have to cut them short now. We have to campaign for that. That's one of the things. And the other thing is we have to point out, as others have, the hypocrisy of the media. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. Although the balance is slightly changing, you do get a bit more of that from a Palestinian point of view. But our main task is to stop what's going on. The damage that's already been done in the Gaza Strip is unbelievable. And we need to step up our campaign. And that is one of our big tasks, is to do that. But I also agree with Tony that I think we have to see about how we can go about so that there is a democratic, secular Palestine. We don't want any religious states. And I think it's important that we campaign, and we've got a big campaign within the trade union movement and in the Labour Party. And Tina's right with what she's been saying, that we can now see the fruition of all that. Well, the campaign against the left and accusing them of being anti-Semitic. And, you know, when Starmer says Israel's got the right to self-defense, well, the Palestinian people have the right to defend themselves as well. It's not a one-sided right. So we have to challenge them all the way. But we have to make sure we're building a big anti-war movement in this country. There are real dangers of it escalating, real dangers that we could be drawn into nuclear war as well, you know. So you've got this, and all the, as someone else said about Ukraine, I don't support a lot of people like they do on Ukraine, but the hypocrisy of it. And you have to ask yourself, why have they got a different attitude to the resistance in Ukraine, to the resistance of the Palestinian people? And for me, it's a class question. They want to do away with any remnants of socialist society, of a worker state. They want to smash that, but they also need Israel to be in existence so that it can continue to divide and rule in the Middle East. So, but our main task is to build an anti-war movement and to hold all of our leaders, trade union and that, to account and place demands on our own government to stop what they're doing.
Thank you, Marion. I'm sorry to rush you along. We have quite a long list of people who want to come in. Yes, Tony, I was going to bring you in now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely with Marion. The question is not the right of Israel, a major military power, to defend itself against what is a largely defenseless population, but the right of the Palestinians to self-defense. And that is indicative of the warped distortion of language by our oppressors, that literally words mean anything they want them to mean. The idea that a nuclear power needs defending against Palestinian peasants, which has been carrying out pogroms and massacres in the West Bank too, in Jenin and Nablus in particular, is the height of absurdity. But lies are what the ruling class thrive on. I'm interested in what Luke has to say about the situation in America, in the heart, in the belly of the beast, as it were. But I think it's gratifying to know that support has been increasing, in particular amongst democratic supporters in America for the Palestinians. And that's certainly the case in Britain. I mean, the majority support amongst the civilian population, amongst ordinary people, is for the Palestinians. It's not for the Zionists. It's not for Israel. I, however, disagree with Steve Freeman about resurrecting yet another peace plan. I mean, the history of Israel has been dotted with peace plans, starting with William Rogers, going via George Bush's roadmap and so on. All of them have fallen to dust. I mean, it's fine talking about peace, but the question, of course, is how you get peace. And to do that, you have to end the Zionist rule over the Palestinians. You have to end Zionism. Zionism is an apartheid and a racist ideology. And as long as that is supported in the Middle East, as long as Israel runs what is a Jewish supremacist regime, then there will be no peace. So you have to deal with the fundamentals. You cannot maintain Zionist rule in Palestine on the one hand, and then see peace, apart from the peace of the graveyard. So I do disagree with that. When I rhetorically put in my blog that how is it they can support resistance of the Ukrainians but not support the resistance of the Palestinians, I wasn't, of course, commenting on the Ukrainian situation itself. I was simply commenting on the rhetoric of our rulers and not going into that situation. Of course, the position in Ukraine is different because of the NATO expansion to their borders, but I don't want to get into that debate now for obvious reasons. There are also one or two questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to read them out actually after you. Should I read them out now quickly?
Well, I was going to do that because
okay,
there's one by John Tumman, I don't grasp unconditional critical support. Surely it's one or the other. No, it's not. You can give unconditional support to the Hamas offensive, to the attack on Israel. On the other hand, you can be critical of the means by which they have conducted that attack. That's what I mean. That was our position, or it was my position, on the IRA. I mean, I supported their fight against the British occupiers in Northern Ireland. It doesn't mean, therefore, I agreed with every dot and comma of what they did. I didn't. Ian Spencer says, we as communists can and should have a view of the strategy and tactics of Hamas. While we support the rights of Palestinians to resist, a war targeted against civilians is counterproductive. Well, that might be true in theory. The problem in Israel is it boasts of an army, which is a civilian army. And most people in Israel, below, I think, the age of 50, are reserve soldiers. So they are part of that army. And I do, I think, 1 month with the army up to the age of 50. So it's very, very difficult to differentiate. You have a civilian population, which is overwhelmingly in support of the siege of Gaza and in support of the wars against the Palestinians. When you had Operation Protective Edge in 2014, when 2,200 Palestinians were murdered by Israel, including 550 children, there was 95% support in the Israeli Jewish population for that war. It actually rose to 97% at one stage. So I'm afraid it's extremely difficult to distinguish between who is not part of the army and who is. The Israeli population, because it's a settler colonial state, overwhelmingly identifies with the Israeli army.
There's a few more questions now, which I'll quickly read out.
Sure.
3 of them sort of are grouped together, I think, under the question of the solution, how to get to some kind of solution. Bob is asking, why have all the previous peace plans failed? Is it just because of Israel's occupation and settlements? And Anita and Laurie both picked you up on your regional solution, which I think is also what Moshe Machova is saying. What kind of forces are there in the Middle East and Israel and Palestine, secular forces perhaps, that are calling for those kind of overthrow of their own regime? Are there any movements that socialists could support?
Well, there are. I'm sure there are movements, in particular in Egypt, where there is a strong working class. To some extent in Iraq, there is a communist party and so on there. But we have to face up to it that the left in the Arab world is weak. So, I mean, the overthrow of those regimes will not simply be the product, if you like, of the working class alone. It will involve much broader forces. The problem is that the repression in those countries is extremely severe. We saw that in 2011 with the Arab Spring, that at the end of the day, the imperialists were able to impose their own solutions. Saudi Arabia went into Bahrain to prevent the regime being overthrown because it's a Sunni regime with a mass Shiite population, and so on. I am wary of, if you like, prescribing solutions because I'm not in a position to do so. All I can say is that I know that the only solution in the end to the Palestinian question is a regional wide one, whether it's the establishment of socialism, whether it's the establishment of radical Arab nationalist regimes, anti-imperialist regimes, such as exist in other parts of the world, like Cuba, for example. I do not know. But Israel exists to watch over those Arab regimes, to protect them, to safeguard them. And it seems to me obvious that if you can overthrow them, and if the cause of the Palestinians becomes a prominent and major one in all the political affairs in those states, then sooner or later, imperialism itself will begin to reconsider the support it gives to the Israeli state. But within the Israeli state itself, there is a cohesive settler population, which may be at times at war with itself over things like the judicial reforms, but they have an agreement amongst them as to the oppression of the Palestinians. So the question of occupation, the question of administrative detention and so on and so forth, never really raised its head amongst the mass Israeli demonstrations. There are fringe elements, the Stop the Occupation bloc and so on, but they were often attacked by other demonstrators who said we shouldn't raise these issues because we will divide people. I mean, it's an old and familiar refrain, I think, that you shouldn't raise radical demands. But those who look to Israel itself for the solution will be waiting a very, very long time, I'm afraid, because, as I say, people do not give up their apartheid privileges voluntarily.
I mean, can I ask you then on your what's your view on Israel? I mean, it shouldn't exist as it is currently existing. I think we're quite as a racist apartheid regime, it shouldn't exist like that. But I mean, you would say that they should have democratic rights under such a regional solution, or do you think they have to leave?
Well, assuming there was a regional solution of which Palestine would be a part, then the Jewish people of Palestine would have every democratic right that any other person had. In addition, they would have language rights, religious rights, and anything particular and peculiar to them. But they wouldn't have national rights, because the Jewish population, as far as I'm concerned, of Israel or Palestine are Palestinians, just as the white South Africans, despite imagining they were a people apart, were at the end of the day white Africans. I mean, that's how the ANC, I think, correctly termed them. And the same with the Jews of Israel. If you were to say they are a nation unto their own, then you would immediately raise the question of self-determination, and you would be back with the Zionist state, because that's what it would mean in practice. So I don't believe that the Israeli Jews form a separate nation, or if they do, they are an oppressor nation, and as such they have no rights to self-determination, because what does self-determination mean? The right to be free of national oppression. That's all it means.
Although if you had around it, socialist, democratic regimes, Arab regimes, they probably wouldn't allow, the Israeli state to continue what it does at the moment.
Well, if we had socialism in the region, then I don't suppose they'd want to.
No, absolutely. They probably stay. Okay, we've got a few more questions. Comrade, I'm going to have to cut you to 3-4 minutes if that's okay. Agnes, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi.
Okay, not questions, just 2 short comments, which I think are relevant to this discussion. Comment number 1, I saw an interview either yesterday or the day before yesterday with someone from one of those kibbutzim near Gaza, where the big attacks took place and a lot of people were murdered. And I think the person who was interviewed was probably a Russian immigrant, judging by his name. But he said something very interesting. He said that they were attacked on Saturday. The army was nowhere to be seen until 24 hours later, because the army was too busy defending the settlers who were doing pogroms, the illegal settlers. So that came from someone from a kibbutz who survived the current atrocities. I thought that was interesting. The other, and as well as sad. So he said that they felt betrayed by the army, by their own army. The other comment is that this whole tragedy is more of a political football than one would imagine. It's entirely bizarre. I watched the Hungarian news channel, which is more or less the same as the BBC in England. And very high-ranking ministers, 2 of them, were saying that there are demonstrations supporting the Palestinians in Berlin, in London, and they mentioned various European countries, as well as even in Canada. But there were no demonstrations to support the Palestinians in Budapest. Therefore, it is quite clear that the safest place for Jews in Europe is Hungary. I mean, I couldn't believe it, but it's so bizarre that I decided to share it with you. And that's it.
Thank you, Agnes. John, please, Fitzgerald.
Yeah, evening all. Where do we start? Hi, Tony.
Yeah, hi, John.
Did you get my check?
I don't think I have.
About that later, maybe.
Discuss that later, I think.
I posted it in your basement.
Oh, right. Well, I'm probably when I get back home, I will, yes.
Oh, where are you?
In France.
Oh, enjoying yourself in France.
Okay.
Good, good.
John,
Yeah.
have you got a question or a comment?
Yeah, sorry. I suppose it's a case of like starting from being objective. So I went into Wikipedia today just to have a look at the history of Hamas. And it actually started off, as far as I can ascertain, if what Wikipedia says is true, as a non-violent branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. They only turned to violence because Israel became more violent. But there was always an internal discussion, in their branch as to whether they, would want to use indiscriminate violence. It became, quid for pro as far as I haven't read all of it, but that's as far as I could see. And I suppose the triggers for all this, it seems to me, is the fact that the oppression over the sit-ups, since the new government coming in has been much stronger. That killed more Palestinians in the West Bank, and it's just going on and on. So you've also, my understanding also, this new government also decided that they were going to have new settlements built. I think, and it was a lot. I'm not sure how many. Tony may know, but that didn't help matters. And of course, Hamas itself wasn't included in these realignment talks, so that probably didn't help.
Okay, comrades,
yeah,
can you?
so they've really been put under it, really. I suppose what I'm thinking of really is that Palestinian solidarity campaign in this country, as far as I know, are giving the uprising and Hamas is full support. And there's a demo this Sunday, and I'm just wondering as to how that is going to play out. Because we're looking at people who've got critical support, uncritical support, so on. The other thing is the Palestinian Authority, they were pushed into this. They were pushed into the joining Hamas in this because, of course, they had very little support, and that's Hamas is the strongest, had the strongest support. They were even elected in the past with a big, they've done very well in that election, and that was put on them by the United States. So, and as for solution, well, as Tony said, I think he's kind of covered that, generally speaking. There has been some discussion about whether Israel actually has nuclear weapons. Some say they do, some say they don't. Perhaps Tony knows for sure or has evidence as such. I just thought I'd make those points for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Bill, please.
Thank you. I'll say brief. The situation here in Ireland is every night from last Monday, there's been demonstrations in Dublin, and it's culminating in a big one on Saturday. Now, I personally support Hamas in everything they do, and I don't listen to this critical support nonsense. I think that comes from people who haven't been invaded since 1066, so they're not in a position to know what it's like Okay, sorry about that. Now, as for this thing about comparing what's going on in Gaza with what's going on in the Ukraine, I think it's off the wall. Ukraine is a fascist state. The Social Democrats are banned, the Christian Democrats are banned, trade unions are banned, everyone is banned. And Ukraine is also, similar to Palestine, an artificial state. It's a very divided society. And 14,000 people were murdered before the Russians made an intervention. And they were reluctant to make an intervention. And they did make an intervention to save a genocide that was going to take place. The Minsk Agreement was signed by the Russians and was supposed to be guaranteed by France and Germany. And did they honor it? No. And Angela Merkel said they had no intentions of ever honoring this, because all they were going to do was to build up their army, to go in to the Russian-speaking areas and genocide 6 million people. So you cannot compare. What's going on in fascist Ukraine is similar to what's going on in fascist Israel. Israel is also an artificial state created, of course, by British imperialism. Any conflicts in the world. Ireland is a victim of British imperialism. Cyprus is a victim of British imperialism. And so is this so-called Israel, which is something out of a storybook. I am looking forward. What's after happening now is that after being shaken to their foundations, they didn't expect oppressed people to come back and to be able to fight it like they are. Now, you'll probably find that other Arab countries will come in and other Arab peoples will come in and support. I would say Hamas will come in and support. Sorry about all that, but that's what I had to say.
Okay, say it. And you did. Becky, hi.
Hi, Tina. Hi, Tony. I just wanted to bring us back. Yeah, I'm very envious, Tony. I just wanted to bring us back to what we can do rather than, although the discussion has been very interesting, what can we do here in the UK and how can we best support the Palestinian people? And I want to talk a little bit, quite quickly, about Keir Starmer. Now, he went on LBC, I think it was today, and he said that Israel has got every right to cut off water, food, fuel, and everything else to the people of Gaza. That is a war crime. So the potential next Prime Minister is supporting the worst of war crimes. Apartheid is a crime against humanity. Keir Starmer has said there is no apartheid, to the extent you can't mention the word apartheid at Labour conference. So I think people on the left in this country have got some very serious thinking to do if they are going to put across to get into power somebody like Keir Starmer. Because not only will he be useless to the British people, he will be a danger to the world. So there was that. I want people to think about what they're going to be doing in the next year vis-a-vis Starmer. Just wanted to reiterate the fact that Elbit Systems have their factories in the UK, and there are people who are going out tirelessly year in, year out to try and shut Elbit down. And I think it behoves us all to support the Palestine Action campaign on Elbit. That's something, again, we can do in the UK. Another thing I think that we've got to be wary of, and probably most people on this call know about how the Zionists in the UK operate, and they operate on the basis of shutting everybody down. So in Brighton, we had a demonstration last Sunday, which was very well attended and had a lot of young Palestinian people there. Of course, the Zionists were immediately putting pressure on the council that we shouldn't be flying Palestinian flags, you know, at this moment of tragedy for people. And we were making the Jewish community feel very unsafe. And that is going to happen in all communities where we resist in the way that we can in England. And so we've all got to be prepared to kick back on that and not take their nonsense. The other thing I wanted to say, just really in response to the discussion, and I think, was it Bill who spoke before me, made a good point. I mean, it's not for us to determine how Palestinian people carry out their struggle. It's not for people in the West, the people who set up the shitty system in the first place. It is not our business. It's their business. We do what we can do in this country to support the Palestinian struggle. That is our role. Another point that was raised, I think it might have been Steve, was saying we need to get on board the Israeli working class. Look, it's pie in the sky to think of getting on board pretty much any Israeli. In terms of actual proper dissidents, it's probably that many. So forget Israel. It's too, what do you call it, when people have had their minds full of some propaganda.
Brainwashed.
Oh, thank you, Tony. I couldn't grasp the word there. The other thing I wanted to say was, I don't know if it's been mentioned, this Saturday, the National PSC has called a demonstration 12 o'clock outside the BBC on Saturday. And that's got to be massive. And there's got to be so many Palestinian flags that Suella Braverman will self-combust, as will Keir Starmer, actually, because he's no different. So please, if people can get to that demo, that would be good. And if there's anybody around in the meeting that's around the South Coast, in Brighton, we're having a peace and justice vigil at 2 o'clock on Sunday at the Peace Statue. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Becky. Definitely get your Palestine flags out while we still can. The more have them up, the better. Tony, do you want to reply to a few things? There's three more.
Yes, sure. I mean, my main criticism of Hamas is they launched this offensive while I went on holiday. So I wasn't able to participate in all the solidarity actions in Britain. But I support just about everything that Becky says. And I think we should really beware of trying to tell the Palestinians how they conduct their struggle. We can certainly, in our discussions with them, and I do have discussions with them, say what is my opinion, but at the end of the day, it's their decision because they're living through these horrors. I am not living through them. As regards what Bill said, by and large, again, I agree with you. I do think one should maintain criticism of the politics of Hamas. I don't think we need to surrender all our critical faculties. I don't agree that Israel is a fascist state. I think fascism is a different creature from settler colonialism. That doesn't make it better. In many cases, it makes it worse, because under fascism, you have a state that is oppressing the vast majority of its own population, whereas in settler colonialism, the settler colonials are a class alliance between the working class and its own ruling class, which is why when Steve talks about the Israeli working class, that's absolute pipe dream. The Israeli working class are actually the most right-wing and chauvinist part of the Israeli population, sadly, because they actually see the privileges that they have as something they want to defend against the outsider, the Palestinians. So there's no question that the Israeli working class will have a revolutionary potential, any more than the white working class of South Africa was. They were the most diehard, if you like, bitter enders, you would call them, people who lasted out till the very end in their belief that there must be white minority rule. So I simply don't feel it. I mean, I think there are more than 10 Israeli anti-Zionists, Becky, but they are numbered in hundreds. They're not even numbered in thousands. So, I mean, they are a minority, and they also operate under very, very difficult conditions. And I accept, I mean, one of them, whose name I've forgotten for the moment, I mean, did describe the tragic murder of two members of Hadash, the Communist Party, in the kibbutz Be'era on Gaza border, and that is tragic. But, you know, I mean, Hamas can't be expected when they attack a kibbutz, and don't forget, the kibbutzim are established on raised Palestinian villages, to distinguish between who's good and who is bad. But we've had this propaganda about babies being killed and so on and so forth, which is actually reminiscent of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. Do you remember when the Americans touted, and this woman spoke in Congress, about how the Iraqi invaders had turned off the incubators in the hospital in Kuwait City, which kept babies alive? In the end, it was proved to be absolute nonsense. There was no truth whatsoever in it. And the same is true about the attack on babies. In fact, you go to my blog, I quote from the Times of Israel yesterday, that when Hamas invaded one of the settlements surrounding Gaza, they killed both of the parents of these children, but the children themselves, they put a blanket over and said, "We don't kill children." And that was the instructions that were given. I'm not saying children didn't die, but what I'm saying is they certainly didn't set out to do that. Whereas Israel, when it bombs a building or a home in Gaza, is absolutely unconcerned about killing children. For them, in the words of Ayelet Shaked, who was the previous Israeli Minister of Justice, they are little snakes, and the little snakes go the way of the bigger snakes as far as she is concerned. So it is Israel that has the genocidal mentality, not Hamas, not the Palestinians, who are the recipient of a Zionist violence for the last century or so. I can't remember whether John asked the question or not, or was simply making a number of observations. But one observation on nuclear weapons: there is absolutely no doubt that Israel possesses a large nuclear arsenal. Mordechai Benunu, who was in prison for 18 years, blew the whistle on that. It's definitively the case that Israel is a nuclear power.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Tony. We have 3 more people with their hands up, and I will bring this meeting to a close. Stuart, please. Oh, you just muted yourself again. Sorry. Unmute yourself one more time, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, that's right. I'm Stuart Richardson. I'm the Secretary of Birmingham Stop the War Coalition, and apologies, I'm rather late to your meeting because Stop the War had a trade union network meeting earlier. I just want to comment on some of the debates and I'll say a few words about what's happening in Birmingham. Clearly, Hamas is a political representative of extremely oppressed people over 75 years. And we should have a position of general solidarity. But I think, I think one has to use certain critical faculties. The killing of 250 people at a music festival is not very productive. And I agree with the general statement that Jeremy Corbyn said: the horrific attacks on civilians in Israel was deplorable. And I think that it's played into the hands of the Zionists to paint this as that this justifies the destruction of Hamas. But what we're facing now is a mass murder on a large scale. An American advisor, a president on the Newsnight, talked about 10,000 people being killed in the next period. Just to say that we had a very successful rally of 400 people on Sunday. Birmingham's not a radical place, and which stopped the war and PSC convened. And we had an official representative of the Birmingham TUC speaking, who are actively promoting the coaches to the demonstration in London. There is a coach from the Shia Mosque in Birmingham as well. And we are supporting a rally at Birmingham University on Friday. And but just to say, I think we're operating in Britain. We're operating in a situation where there is a broad propaganda for the Zionist cause, and I found that one of the most effective ways of dealing with it is to discuss the fact that Israel, virtually everywhere in Israel, and of course everywhere in the West Bank, you have racially segregated housing. You have, and this is published in the Jewish Chronicle, the high point of British Zionism, that Palestinian Arab schools inside Israel get about a third of the funding of Jewish children. That you have different laws for Jewish children who commit offenses from Palestinian children. And you have to say bluntly to these people, if it's so good in Israel to have racially segregated areas, why don't you start campaigning for that only white people can live in Northfield, and that only Asian people can live in Yardley? And when you try to confront people like that, you bring up the contradictions of the argument. I think that's quite effective in terms of arguing the case. I think that, but we have a great responsibility in the coming days. We are going to see mass murder at a great scale, and the prospect is so bad that even the BBC are shifting. If you got the regular interviews with the physician from Gaza about the terrible state of the situation, I think we should be slightly optimistic that we can move a powerful movement condemning Israeli military action and condemning the government's backing for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Stuart. Victor. No, sorry. We've got Anthony first because he's got his camera on already. Victor, put your camera on, please.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I think we can build a mass movement against the danger of a third world war, and people can see the dangers very clearly. And why America's pushing this, I think that they wanted something to happen. What they didn't we don't agree with all the attacks of other people dying, but what they didn't see was the mass upheaval it was causing throughout the Intifada in the West Bank. And I heard a few days, not much information on Twitter, but it's spread now to Jerusalem by the Palestinians against.
Slower, comrade. Can you speak a bit slower?
So, yeah. Did you hear the first bit about the possibility of building a mass movement?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's happened is Al Jazeera put it clearly. What they didn't expect is that the Palestinian masses are not going to be cowed, and that's what Tony said, by the Zionist suppressors, because they've seen that they can be militarily weakened. So that psychology of submission has been weakened. But I saw on the Russian news, you can get that on RT Rumble on my computer downstairs. Sometimes you have to sign in, but you can get it free. It's highly suppressed, more than the Iranians. But what it shows are mass demonstrations in Lebanon, Yemen, Egypt, Kuwait, even in support of the Palestinians. And if Syria's opened up rocket attacks in retaliation, Hezbollah. And I heard on the news on Twitter Saturday that the Syrian regime is with Hezbollah preparing for a third world war if Israel attacks them. And if you remember, before the Ukrainian intervention, they lost Libya. Russia wasn't prepared to lose Syria, partly because it'd be the Black Sea port. So if they attack the Assad regime too much, Russia could be drawn in the Third World War. And I read on Twitter today, Russia's got the airlift ready to go into Syria, whether that's to evacuate their citizens or because America's sending aircraft carriers. That's gunpowder diplomacy around Syria and Russia and China. Because what they're worried about is the dollar going. And Putin said this war could accelerate that process. But the thing is, Corbyn does not support the colonial revolution or the planned economies against imperialism. We need to build a maximum to stop the escalation and also link up the fight against the Third World War with the fight against austerity. But we can't be able to let either doing individual actions. We have to have united fronts, but we also got to challenge the reformists because that has become revolutionary throughout the Middle East. And I think the key to start the Third World War, more than that, as I've said to years, the Trotskyists might come to about 100 years after our founding just to stop world capitalism. But if they should give us a capitalism, we're all going to be dead. And this war is probably hundreds of billions of billions. And war is the midwife for revolution.
Okay, thank you, comrade. Victor, can you switch your camera on, please? Or do you want to speak without it? Victor, do you want to speak? No. Okay.
Yeah,
Tony.
I can hear you. I'm speaking.
Okay, go on.
Oh, right, you can hear me. That's excellent.
Yeah.
I make the presumption, which I think we all accept, but if you don't, please say so. And my camera's come on. Hallelujah. That the Israeli Zionist apartheid state would not be there in its present form were it not for massive amounts of Western support that's propping it up and maintaining that. Now, if you accept that presumption, which I hold to be true, obviously if you don't say so, and then my next question is irrelevant. My next question is, why is it that all these Western countries that have strict anti-racist laws, I mean, you couldn't go to a football match and make a monkey chant without finding yourself prosecuted, named, shamed, sacked, etc. The political parties are all supposedly anti-racist. Our main political parties, the Lib Dems, are anti-racist, the Greens are anti-racist, the Contratatives are anti-racist, and Stormtroopers Blairite Lino, Labour in name only party, is supposedly anti-racist. So anti-racist and paranoid about racism that it's labelled most of you here on this show as evil neo-Nazi racist anti-Semites. Yet they all seem to want to support this Zionist apartheid Jewish supremacist state. How does one explain that? That's a question I want to ask.
Okay.
Thank you.
You've asked it. Thank you. Tony, when you're summing up, I've got another question for you from the chat here, which is giving money to Palestinians is obviously very, very difficult, seeing as most of the channels are closed up. Medical aid for Palestinians or war on want, they're both asking for money. Is it worthwhile supporting them, or does it go into, you know, the CEO's hands, etc.?
Well, to take that point first, I mean, certainly money raised by any charity some of it will go to support the staff who are employed by that charity, but certainly medical aid for Palestine, War on Want, and similar charities are quite bona fide, and they do a lot of good. There's a Middle East Children's Alliance, which is another. I raise funds for the Alta Fork Children's Centre in Jenin. There's IMET 2000, which provides specialist medical help, which is a particularly good charity I recommend. So it's really up to people, but all these charities do good work and provide, if you like, the basic care that the Israeli state as the occupier should be doing under the Geneva Convention, but doesn't do. And that, of course, is the problem. But I don't want to comment on anything further, really, the other speakers have said. I mean, I don't disagree with any of them, the most recent speakers. simply to say, I mean, all I can reiterate is our duty as socialists is to support the oppressed. And we make a very sharp distinction between the nationalism of the oppressor and the nationalism of the oppressed. Because as Marx said, a nation that oppresses another nation shall not itself be free. And Lenin always made this distinction about the right of self-determination of oppressed nations. The Israelis, of course, are not an oppressed nation, so it doesn't arise. But that is a basic duty of socialists, to give support to the oppressed wherever and whenever they fight. And there's no doubt, I mean, Hamas has been fighting a battle on behalf of the Palestinians of Gaza. Whatever you think of the organization, we each have our own view, but they are secondary to the fact that we should be giving them unconditional support and mounting as much political pressure as we can in the coming weeks to prevent the war crimes that Israel is threatening to carry out. Because we know what the goal of Netanyahu and his cabinet and the coalition is, and that is to ethnically cleanse Palestine of Palestinians. They've been doing that in the West Bank for the last year with the pogroms and the clearing out, the intimidation of villagers, in particular in the South Hebron Hills, but elsewhere as well. That goes without saying. So we have a very, very basic duty. And it is no use talking about or looking to the settler population. There will be some Israelis, people like Moshe Machava, but others, Ronnie Barkin, I know, and others in Palestine Action, who have shown which side they are on. And that is all to the good. But they are a tiny, tiny handful, unfortunately, because in the settler colonial states, amongst the settlers, you get very, very few who break from the consensus, if you like. So that is really our duty. I'm glad we've had such a good meeting, that we've had up to 150 or more people attend this meeting. And I have no doubt from the demonstrations taking place that there is mass support for the Palestinians, and people do understand who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed. And our ruling class is doing its best to shut down any discussion by branding support for the Palestinians, support for terrorism. And we have to make a very clear distinction. The terrorists are you. The terrorists are people like Suella Braverman and Joe Biden, because they're threatening mass destruction on a scale unimagined. They are arming Israel in order to perpetrate war crimes. If that is not terrorism, I don't know what is. So thank you, comrades. I should also add, I'm on a laptop out in the garden where I'm situated in France. It hasn't, it's not connected to our power supply, and I'm very pleased it's still got 50% of the power remaining. So I did worry that it might not last out, but it's done very well.
Want to carry on for another 2 hours? No.
But I don't want to do that either. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. That was brilliant. Very good discussion. Thank you all for participating. Attend demonstrations where they are happening in your area, or organize some if there aren't any happening. Donate if you can, critically, whatever, for some charities. Go online, counter the offensive by the mainstream media, because they are really trying their best. Stand up to the anti-Semitism smear campaign. This will get worse. This is what the last few years in the Labour Party, that's what this is about now currently. This is to silence all supporters of Palestine, to now only have one narrative, democracy, Israel needs to be defended. And we are using our alternative media, meetings like this, to put the other side forward. And the truth is that, as Tony has outlined, there's an oppressor nation and there's an oppressed nation. It's clearly a huge difference. Thank you very much, comrades, for seeing you, so many of you in this meeting, and let's continue the fight. Bye, Tony.
Bye.
Rest of your holiday.
Bye.